Imagine this: a picture-perfect life in a Manhattan penthouse, a loving husband, and a baby on the way. But one glimpse of a mysterious text during an ultrasound appointment shatters everything. What starts as a suspicion of infidelity spirals into a web of stolen millions, forged identities, and a ruthless betrayal that leaves a pregnant woman fighting for her life, her fortune, and her future. Secrets, scandals, and shocking twists await. Will she lose it all, or rise from the ruins to deliver justice? Stick around to uncover the full, unbelievable true story of deception and triumph. If this hooked you, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts on the wildest twist. Share with a friend who loves drama. And subscribe for more gripping tales like this one. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her silk maternity dress as she sat in the sterile waiting room of Manhattan's most exclusive medical center. At 7 months pregnant, she should have been glowing with anticipation. But something felt different today. Her husband David had been distant lately, his usual attentiveness replaced by hurried phone calls and mysterious late-night meetings. "Mrs. Mitchell." Dr. Anderson's warm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ready to see your beautiful baby?" Sarah smiled, placing her hand on her rounded belly. Despite her concerns about David's recent behavior, this moment always filled her with pure joy. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, the familiar hum of equipment creating a soothing backdrop as the doctor applied the cool gel to her stomach. "There's your little princess," Dr. Anderson announced, pointing to the screen where their daughter's profile was clearly visible. "Everything looks perfect. She's measuring right on track for your due date." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "She's beautiful." "David, look at her little nose. She has your—" She turned to share the moment with her husband, but he wasn't looking at the screen. Instead, his phone had buzzed, and he was reading a text message with an expression she'd never seen before. His face had drained of color, and his jaw was clenched tight. The phone buzzed again, and again. David's thumb moved quickly across the screen, typing responses with an urgency that made Sarah's stomach clench with something other than pregnancy discomfort. "David," she whispered, trying to keep her voice light, "the doctor is showing us our daughter." "What? Oh, yes, beautiful," he said without looking up, his fingers still flying across the phone screen. The messages kept coming, each buzz making him more agitated. Dr. Anderson finished the examination, printed several ultrasound photos, and excused herself to give them privacy. As soon as the door closed, Sarah reached for David's hand. "Who keeps texting you? Is everything okay with the company?" David jerked his hand away, clutching the phone to his chest. "It's nothing, Sarah. Just some issues with the Singapore expansion. You know how these international deals are." But Sarah had caught a glimpse of the message preview on his screen before he pulled it away. The words that burned into her memory weren't about business deals or expansion plans. They were intimate, personal, written in a way that made her blood run cold. "Can't wait for tonight. I've been thinking about you all day." The sender's name had been abbreviated, showing only the initial E followed by a heart emoji. Sarah's perfect world suddenly felt like it was tilting on its axis. She tried to rationalize what she'd seen. Maybe it was Elena Rodriguez, David's new business partner. They'd been working closely together on several projects lately, but business partners didn't send messages with heart emojis. They didn't write about thinking about each other all day. "Sarah, are you listening?" David's voice seemed to come from far away. She realized she'd been staring at him, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to consider. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I said I need to head back to the office. There's a crisis with the Tokyo team that can't wait." He was already reaching for his jacket, avoiding her eyes. "But we were going to have lunch, to celebrate the ultrasound, to talk about names." Her voice sounded small, almost pleading. "We'll do it another time. Okay, this is important." He kissed her forehead quickly, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like dismissal than affection. "Take care of yourself and the baby." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the medical center with ultrasound photos clutched in her trembling hands and questions spinning through her mind like a tornado. The drive home to their Manhattan penthouse felt endless. Sarah's mind kept replaying the scene, analyzing every detail. David's strange behavior over the past few weeks suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. The late meetings that started 3 months ago, the sudden need for privacy when taking phone calls, the way he'd started showering immediately when he came home, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of the day. Their penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building overlooking Central Park. Sarah had decorated it herself when they were newlyweds 5 years ago, choosing warm colors and comfortable furniture that would make their house feel like a home. Now, walking through the spacious rooms filled with expensive art and fresh flowers that their housekeeper arranged twice weekly, everything felt cold and foreign. She set the ultrasound photos on the granite kitchen counter and stared at them. Their daughter's tiny face looked so peaceful, so innocent. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling a small kick as if the baby sensed her distress. "It's okay, sweet girl," she whispered. "Mommy's just being silly. Daddy loves us both very much." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. Sarah walked to David's study, a room she rarely entered. It was his private space, filled with his computer equipment, financial documents, and awards from various tech industry organizations. She'd always respected his need for this sanctuary, but today felt different. His desk was impeccably organized. As always. Sarah wasn't sure what she was looking for until she saw it. David's spare phone charger lay on the desk, but there was no phone connected to it. He always left his personal phone charging here when he worked late in his study. So where was it? A memory surfaced. David coming home last night, heading straight to the bedroom instead of his usual routine of checking messages in his study. He'd said he was exhausted, that he just wanted to hold her and the baby. At the time, she'd been touched by his tenderness. Now she wondered if he'd been hiding something. Sarah returned to the kitchen and picked up her own phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Elena Rodriguez's number. They'd met several times at company events. Elena was brilliant, beautiful, and ambitious. She was also 29 years old, single, and everything Sarah used to be before she became a wife and mother-to-be. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she say? How do you ask someone if they're having an affair with your husband, especially when that someone is supposed to be his business partner? Instead of calling, Sarah set the phone down and walked to their bedroom. She needed to think, to plan. If her worst fears were true, she couldn't just react emotionally. She had a daughter to protect now, a future to secure. But first, she needed proof. Sarah opened David's closet, her hands shaking as she searched through his jacket pockets. The expensive suits hung in perfect rows, organized by color and season. In the pocket of the navy blue suit he'd worn yesterday, her fingers found something that made her heart stop. A hotel key card. The Meridian Hotel, one of the most exclusive boutique hotels in Manhattan. Attached to the key card with a small paper clip was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. The elegant script was definitely feminine. "Can't wait for tonight. Room 412. All my love, E." Sarah sank onto their bed, the key card trembling in her hands. This wasn't her imagination. This wasn't pregnancy hormones making her paranoid. This was real. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, the man she'd trusted with her entire heart and future, was having an affair. The room spun around her as the full implications hit her. How long had this been going on? Was Elena just a fling, or was this something deeper? And what did this mean for their marriage, their family, their life together? Sarah looked around their bedroom, taking in the king-size bed they shared, the photos of their wedding day on the nightstand, the nursery they'd been preparing just down the hall. Everything she thought she knew about her life had just crumbled in the space of a few hours. She clutched the ultrasound photos to her chest and made a decision. She couldn't confront David with just this key card and note. She needed more information. She needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with before she decided how to protect herself and her daughter. But first, she needed to know the truth about Elena Rodriguez, and exactly what kind of relationship she had with David Mitchell. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed a number she never thought she'd need. Peterson Investigations, a professional voice answered. Yes, I need to hire a private investigator, Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I believe my husband is having an affair, and I need proof. As she scheduled the appointment for the next morning, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The trusting, naive wife was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more determined, someone who wouldn't be a victim. The storm was just beginning, and Sarah Mitchell was going to be ready for it. The next morning, Sarah sat across from Detective Patricia Walsh in a small coffee shop in Soho, far from their usual Manhattan social circles. Patricia was a former NYPD detective who now ran her own investigation firm, specializing in matrimonial cases. Her no-nonsense demeanor and steel gray hair inspired confidence, something Sarah desperately needed. Let me be straight with you, Mrs. Mitchell, Patricia said, stirring her black coffee. In my 25 years of experience, when a pregnant wife hires me, it's because her instincts are telling her something she doesn't want to believe. And those instincts are usually right. Sarah slid the hotel key card and note across the small table. I found these in my husband's jacket pocket yesterday after our doctor's appointment. He was receiving texts during our ultrasound that seemed very personal. Patricia examined the evidence with practiced eyes. The Meridian Hotel, expensive, private, popular with people who have something to hide. She looked up at Sarah. Tell me about Elena Rodriguez. She's David's business partner. They started a new venture together about 4 months ago, right around the time his behavior started changing. Sarah paused, remembering. She's brilliant, successful, beautiful. Everything I used to be before I became a housewife. Don't sell yourself short, Patricia said firmly. You're 7 months pregnant and still thinking clearly enough to gather evidence before making accusations. That takes strength. She pulled out a contract. If you hire me, I'll need complete honesty. I'll also need you to be prepared for whatever I find. Sometimes the truth is worse than we imagine. Sarah signed the contract without hesitation. I need to know everything, not just about the affair, but about our finances, his business dealings, anything that might affect my daughter's future. Smart woman, Patricia nodded approvingly. Give me a week. That week felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She maintained her normal routine, attending prenatal yoga classes, having lunch with friends, and playing the role of the perfect billionaire's wife. But inside, she was dying a little more each day. David's behavior became even more suspicious. He started taking calls in the bathroom, claiming the connection was better there. He began working late almost every night, coming home after Sarah had gone to bed. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he claimed he was too stressed about the company's expansion. The Singapore deal is more complicated than we expected, he'd say, not meeting her eyes. Elena and I are working around the clock to make it happen. Elena and I, the phrase felt like a knife twisting in Sarah's chest every time he said it. On Thursday morning, Patricia called. We need to meet, she said simply. I have information. They met at the same coffee shop, but this time Patricia carried a thick manila folder and wore the expression of someone delivering bad news. Sit down, Sarah, Patricia said gently. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. Sarah braced herself, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. The affair is real, and it's been going on for 6 months, not 4. I have photos, hotel receipts, and credit card statements. They're not just sleeping together. Sarah, they're living like a couple, dinner dates, weekend trips, shared apartments in 3 different cities. Patricia opened the folder and began laying out photographs. Sarah stared at images of David and Elena holding hands walking down a street in Chicago, kissing in the lobby of a San Francisco hotel, sharing an intimate dinner at a restaurant Sarah recognized as one of David's favorites. But there's more, Patricia continued. Elena Rodriguez isn't just his affair partner. She's also his secret business partner, in ways that go far beyond what you've been told. Sarah's blood ran cold. What do you mean? I mean they've been moving money, lots of it, into accounts that only they control. The Singapore expansion you've been hearing about, it doesn't exist. They've been using that as a cover to hide assets offshore. Patricia pulled out financial documents that Sarah didn't understand, but recognized as serious. Your husband has been systematically moving marital assets into business ventures that benefit only him and Elena. If you were to divorce right now, you'd be left with almost nothing. The room spun around Sarah. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, about $40 million that should be considered marital assets, all moved in the past 6 months under the guise of business investments? Sarah felt sick. So not only is he cheating on me, he's also stealing from me. I'm afraid so. And there's one more thing. Patricia hesitated. Elena Rodriguez is pregnant too. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She doubled over, struggling to breathe. The betrayal was complete. While she was carrying David's child, believing they were building a future together, he was building an entirely different future with another woman who was also pregnant with his child. How do you know? Sarah whispered. I followed her to a prenatal appointment yesterday. Same doctor's office you use. Different doctor. She's about 3 months along. Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. Elena had gotten pregnant around the same time Sarah had entered her second trimester. David had been juggling 2 pregnant women, 2 relationships, 2 entirely different lives. What do I do now? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. You fight, Patricia said firmly. You document everything. You get the best lawyer you can find, and you fight for your daughter's future. But Sarah, you need to be careful. Men who steal this much money from their wives often don't react well when they're caught. Sarah wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. The pregnancy had made her emotional, but it had also made her fierce. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her daughter. I need copies of everything, she said, and I need the name of the best divorce attorney in New York. I can recommend someone, Patricia said. Marcus Thompson. He's expensive, but he specializes in high-asset divorces involving hidden money. He'll know how to protect you. As Sarah walked home through Central Park, her mind was already planning her next moves. She thought about the nursery she'd been decorating, the future she'd imagined for their family, the life she'd thought they were building together. All of it had been a lie. But she wasn't the same trusting woman who had hired a private investigator a week ago. She was becoming someone harder, smarter, more determined, someone who wouldn't be victimized by the man she'd loved and trusted. That evening, David came home earlier than usual, carrying flowers and wearing the smile that used to make her heart skip. How are my girls doing? He asked, kissing her forehead and placing his hand on her belly. Sarah looked at him and saw a stranger. A man who could lie to her face while carrying on an elaborate double life. A man who could steal their daughter's future while pretending to care about their family. We're fine, she said calmly. How was your day? Any progress on the Singapore deal? Some complications, but Elena and I are working through them, he said easily, the lie rolling off his tongue like he'd practiced it. Sarah nodded and smiled, playing her part while inside she was screaming. Tomorrow she would meet with Marcus Thompson. Tomorrow she would begin building her case. But tonight, she would gather more evidence. I'm going to take a bath, she announced. All this pregnancy weight is making my back ache. Good idea. I'll make some calls in my study. As Sarah soaked in their marble bathtub, she could hear David on the phone through the bathroom door. His voice was warm, intimate, loving, the voice he used to use when talking to her. I miss you too, she heard him say. Tomorrow night, I promise, same place. Sarah closed her eyes and sank deeper into the warm water. Tomorrow night, she would make sure Marcus Thompson's investigator was at the Meridian Hotel with a camera. Tomorrow night, David Mitchell would give her all the evidence she needed to destroy him. But first, she had to survive the confrontation that was coming. Because Patricia was right about one thing. Men who steal $40 million from their pregnant wives don't react well when they're caught, and Sarah was about to catch him red-handed. Sarah spent the morning meeting with Marcus Thompson, a shark of a divorce attorney whose corner office overlooked the Manhattan skyline. His reputation preceded him. He'd handled some of the most notorious high-profile divorces in New York, and his track record was impeccable. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said, reviewing Patricia Walsh's file, "your husband has made a crucial mistake. He's been so focused on hiding assets that he's left a paper trail. We can use this." Marcus was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that suggested his hourly rate was as impressive as his success rate. His confidence was exactly what Sarah needed. "What are my options?" Sarah asked, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "We can file for divorce immediately and request emergency asset freezing orders. With this evidence of financial fraud, the court will likely grant them. But Sarah," Marcus paused, "I need you to understand that once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Your husband will know exactly what you've discovered." Sarah thought about the past week of living with David's lies, watching him kiss her goodbye each morning before going to spend his day with Elena. "I can't go back anyway. Not after this." "Good. Then here's what we're going to do." That evening, Sarah waited in David's study, the manila folder from Patricia Walsh spread across his desk. She'd spent an hour arranging the photographs and financial documents in a way that would have maximum impact. The hotel key card and Elena's note sat prominently in the center, surrounded by images of David's double life. When she heard David's key in the front door, Sarah's heart began racing. 7 months pregnant and exhausted from a day of legal meetings, she felt vulnerable despite her preparation, but she also felt stronger than she ever had before. "Sarah," David called out. "I'm home." "In your study," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady. David walked into his study with his usual end-of-day smile, loosening his tie. The smile died the moment he saw his desk. "What is this?" he asked, but his face had already given him away. The color drained from his cheeks as he stared at the evidence of his betrayal, laid out like a prosecutor's case. "It's the truth, David," Sarah said calmly. "Finally." David moved closer to the desk, his eyes scanning the photographs and documents. Sarah watched his face transform as he realized the extent of what she'd discovered. The charming, successful businessman disappeared, replaced by someone Sarah had never seen before. Someone calculating and cold. "You hired a private investigator." His voice was quiet, dangerous. "I did what any intelligent woman would do when her husband started acting like a stranger." David picked up one of the photographs showing him and Elena in an intimate embrace outside a Chicago hotel. His jaw clenched as he set it down. "Sarah, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Sarah's voice rose for the first time. "Because it looks like you've been having an affair with Elena Rodriguez for 6 months. It looks like she's pregnant with your child. It looks like you've been stealing our money to fund your secret life with her." "I haven't stolen anything," David exploded, his composure finally cracking. "Those are business investments. Legal business investments. $40 million in business investments that coincidentally happened after you started sleeping with your business partner." Sarah stood up, her pregnancy making the movement awkward, but her voice deadly calm. "Don't insult my intelligence, David. I may have been naive, but I'm not stupid." David began pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. "You don't understand the complexity of international business. Sarah, you never have. Those investments are legitimate." "Then explain them to me," Sarah challenged. "Explain the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Explain the property purchases in Elena's name. Explain why your pregnant wife knew nothing about any of this." David stopped pacing and stared at her with an expression she'd never seen before. "You're being hysterical. This is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction I'd expect from someone in your condition." The words hit Sarah like a slap. "My condition? You mean being 7 months pregnant with your daughter while you're planning a future with another woman who's also carrying your child. Sarah, please. David's voice shifted, becoming the smooth, persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. You're upset, and I understand why, but Elena means nothing to me. She's a business partner who got a little too attached. I've been trying to figure out how to extract myself from the situation without damaging the company. Sarah stared at him in amazement. Even confronted with undeniable evidence, he was still lying. 6 months of hotel receipts, David, weekend trips, shared apartments, love letters. And you want me to believe she means nothing to you? I was protecting you and the baby from the stress of a complicated business situation? By stealing $40 million of our money? By securing our daughter's future? David's voice rose again. Everything I've done has been to build something bigger, something that will provide for our family for generations. Our family, Sarah laughed bitterly. Which family? David, the one where you're married to me, or the one where you're building a life with Elena and her baby? David's face went white. How did you? She's not keeping it. That situation is being handled. The casual cruelty of his words made Sarah physically sick. Handled, you mean you're forcing her to have an abortion? I mean, I'm cleaning up a mistake that never should have happened. Sarah looked at the man she'd married and realized she'd never known him at all. The David she'd fallen in love with had been kind, compassionate, protective of those he cared about. This man was talking about handling an unborn child like it was a business problem. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out of this house. Now. Tonight. David's expression hardened. This is my house. Sarah. My name is on the deed. My money paid for everything in it. Our money, Sarah corrected. And according to my attorney, once those asset freezing orders go through tomorrow morning, you won't be able to touch any of it. David went very still. Your attorney, Marcus Thompson. I'm sure you've heard of him. He specializes in cases exactly like this one. For a moment, Sarah thought David might become violent. His hands clenched into fists, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. She took a step back, suddenly aware of how isolated they were in the penthouse, how vulnerable she was. You have no idea what you've done, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. No idea what you're risking. I'm risking everything for my daughter's future, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. Something you clearly stopped caring about the moment you decided Elena mattered more than your family. David grabbed his laptop from the desk and headed for the door. You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll regret it more than you can imagine. I regret trusting you, Sarah called after him. I regret believing you loved me, but I'll never regret protecting our daughter from a father who would steal from her before she's even born. The front door slammed with such force that the windows rattled. Sarah sank into David's desk chair, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. She looked around the study that had been his private sanctuary, now violated by the truth of who he really was. Outside, rain began hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows with increasing intensity. Sarah watched the water streak down the glass, distorting the city lights below into an impressionist painting of her shattered life. She picked up her phone to call Marcus Thompson, but before she could dial, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, dropping the phone as another wave of pain followed. No, she whispered, pressing her hands to her belly. Not now. Please, not now. But her body wasn't listening to her pleas. The stress of the confrontation, the emotional trauma of David's betrayal, and the physical exhaustion of the past week were taking their toll. Sarah felt wetness between her legs and knew with terrifying certainty that something was wrong. She managed to grab her phone and dial 911, but as the operator answered, another pain doubled her over and everything went black. The last thing Sarah heard before losing consciousness was the sound of rain against the windows and the distant wail of sirens getting closer. Her perfect storm was becoming a hurricane, and she was facing it alone. Sarah woke up in a hospital bed surrounded by the steady beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell of medical equipment. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she'd gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back. The confrontation with David, the evidence spread across his desk, his cold dismissal of Elena's pregnancy. Mrs. Mitchell, a gentle voice brought her back to the present. I'm Dr. Rebecca Martinez. You're at Mount Sinai Hospital. Sarah's hands immediately went to her belly, panic rising in her throat. My baby. She's okay. Dr. Martinez said quickly, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's arm. You went into premature labor, but we were able to stop it. Your daughter is strong, and everything looks normal on the monitors. Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely that tears began streaming down her face. I thought I was going to lose her. The contractions were brought on by stress and dehydration. Your body was telling you to slow down. Dr. Martinez pulled up a chair beside the bed. Sarah, I need to ask you some difficult questions. The paramedics said they found you unconscious in what appeared to be a home office with papers scattered everywhere. Is there something going on at home that might be causing you unusual stress? Before Sarah could answer, her sister Jennifer burst through the door, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her own shift as a pediatric nurse across town. Oh my God, Sarah! Jennifer rushed to her bedside. When the hospital called, I thought, are you okay? Is the baby okay? We're both okay, Sarah said, squeezing Jennifer's hand. Just some complications from stress. Dr. Martinez excused herself to give them privacy, but not before extracting a promise from Sarah to remain in the hospital for observation for at least 24 hours. What happened? Jennifer asked once they were alone. And don't tell me it was just regular pregnancy stress. You look like you'd been hit by a truck when I saw you last week. Sarah took a deep breath and told Jennifer everything. About hiring the private investigator, about David's affair with Elena, about the stolen money and Elena's pregnancy. Jennifer's face grew darker with each revelation. That bastard, Jennifer said when Sarah finished. I never liked him. You know, too smooth, too perfect. I always wondered what he was hiding. You never said anything. Because you loved him, and you seemed happy. But Sarah, no one is that perfect. Real people have flaws, make mistakes, show vulnerability. David always seemed like he was performing the role of the perfect husband, rather than actually being one. Sarah realized Jennifer was right. Even in their most intimate moments, David had maintained a kind of emotional distance, as if he was always holding something back. What am I going to do? Jen, I'm 7 months pregnant. My husband has stolen $40 million of our money to fund his life with his pregnant mistress, and I'm about to be a single mother. First, you're going to get better, Jennifer said firmly. Then you're going to fight. You're going to take him for everything he's worth, and you're going to build a life for you and your daughter that doesn't depend on his lies. A knock on the door interrupted them. Sarah expected to see Dr. Martinez or a nurse, but instead, David walked in carrying an enormous bouquet of white roses and wearing an expression of concerned devotion that would have fooled anyone who didn't know the truth. My darling, he said, rushing to her bedside. I came as soon as I heard, are you okay? Is the baby okay? Sarah stared at him in amazement. Less than 8 hours ago, he'd stormed out of their house after she'd confronted him with evidence of his betrayal. Now he was playing the role of the devoted husband as if nothing had happened. Hello, David, Jennifer said coldly. Funny how you managed to find time in your busy schedule to visit your wife in the hospital? David's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Jennifer, I know you're protective of Sarah, but this isn't the time for family politics. My wife and daughter need my support right now. Your wife needed your support when she was home alone, dealing with the stress of discovering her husband's affair. Jennifer shot back. David's face went pale, and he glanced around the room as if just realizing they weren't alone. Sarah, perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss, Sarah said quietly. Everything I needed to say was said last night. You were upset, understandably so, but you misunderstood the situation. I've terminated my partnership with Elena, and I'm prepared to transfer all those business assets back into our joint accounts immediately. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of amazement and disgust. You think this is about money? Isn't it? You hired a divorce attorney? You're threatening asset freezes? If this is about securing our daughter's financial future, I understand. I respect that, but we can work this out without destroying our family. David, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fury building inside her. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to build a second one with Elena Rodriguez. David sat down in the chair beside her bed, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away before he could touch her. Sarah, I made mistakes. I got caught up in the excitement of building something new, and I lost sight of what was really important, but it's over now. Elena means nothing to me. She never did. Is that what you told her when you convinced her to have an abortion? David's face went white. How did you know about that? Because unlike you, I actually pay attention to the people in my life. I can see the truth even when you're lying to my face. Jennifer moved closer to the bed, positioning herself between David and Sarah like a protective barrier. I think you should leave, Jennifer said. My sister needs rest, not more stress from your lies. I'm not leaving my wife when she's in the hospital, David said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Especially not when she's being influenced by people who don't understand our situation. Our situation? Sarah's voice rose despite her exhaustion. David, there is no our situation anymore. There's my situation, which is rebuilding my life after discovering my husband is a liar and a thief. And there's your situation, which is about to become very complicated when those asset freezing orders go through this morning. David stood up abruptly, the concerned husband mask finally slipping completely. You have no idea what you're messing with, Sarah. No idea what those business deals mean or how many people they affect. If you freeze those assets, you'll destroy more than just our marriage. Good, Sarah said. Maybe Elena will finally understand what kind of man she's been sleeping with. David's face twisted with anger. Elena is not your concern anymore. You're right, Sarah said. She's not, but our daughter is. And I won't have her growing up thinking it's normal for fathers to lie, cheat, and steal from their families. A commotion outside the room interrupted their argument. Through the partially open door, Sarah could see hospital security talking to someone in the hallway. A moment later, a young woman with dark hair and a visibly pregnant belly appeared in the doorway. Elena Rodriguez. David. Elena's voice was small, uncertain. The hospital said you were here. I was worried about... She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Sarah in the bed, saw Jennifer standing protectively beside her, saw the tension in the room. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sarah stared at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, noting the expensive handbag, the designer maternity dress, the jewelry that had probably been purchased with money stolen from Sarah's own accounts. Elena, David said, his voice warning, you shouldn't be here. I was worried about Sarah, Elena said, and to Sarah's surprise, she sounded genuine. When I heard she was in the hospital, I thought, considering everything. She trailed off, looking lost. Considering that you're sleeping with my husband and carrying his child, Sarah said, her voice calm despite the turmoil in her chest. Elena's face crumpled. Sarah, I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, Jennifer said harshly. You helped this man steal from a pregnant woman. You helped him plan to abandon his family. That's not true, Elena said, tears starting to flow. David said you two were separated. He said the marriage was over, that you were just staying together until after the baby was born for financial reasons. Sarah looked at David, who had gone completely white. Is that what you told her? David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Elena continued, her voice breaking. He said you didn't love each other anymore, that you were both just going through the motions. He said you'd be happier once you were free to find someone who really loved you. The cruelty of David's lies was breathtaking. Not only had he betrayed Sarah, but he'd also manipulated Elena with a completely fabricated story about their marriage. Elena, Sarah said gently. 3 days ago, David and I were shopping for nursery furniture together. Last week, we were discussing baby names. I've never been happier in my marriage than I was before I discovered the truth about you two. Elena stared at David with growing horror. You said she knew about us. You said she was okay with it. Elena, don't, David said urgently. This isn't the time or place. When is the time? David, Elena's voice was rising. When is the time to tell me the truth about anything? Because apparently, everything you've told me for the past 6 months has been a lie. Sarah watched the scene unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine pity for Elena. The younger woman had been manipulated just as thoroughly as Sarah had been, just in a different way. How many months are you? Sarah asked Elena. 3.5, Elena whispered. Sarah did the math quickly. Elena had gotten pregnant right around the time Sarah had entered her second trimester, when she was dealing with morning sickness and fatigue. While Sarah was struggling with the physical challenges of pregnancy, believing she had her husband's support, David had been getting another woman pregnant. Did he tell you to have an abortion? Sarah asked. Elena's tears fell harder. He said it would be better for everyone, that we needed to focus on building the business before we could think about starting a family. But you didn't want to. No, I've always wanted children. I thought he wanted them too. I thought we were building something real together. Sarah felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for Elena. She was younger, probably less experienced with men like David, and she'd been fed a completely different set of lies. David had been playing them both, manipulating them both, using them both for different purposes while planning a future that served only himself. Elena, Sarah said carefully, I think you and I need to have a conversation, but not here and not with him present. David stepped forward. Sarah, don't do something you'll regret. The only thing I regret, Sarah said, is not seeing who you really were sooner. Hospital security appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, but visiting hours are over, and we've had complaints about raised voices. I'm going to have to ask everyone except immediate family to leave. Jennifer remained beside Sarah's bed while David and Elena were escorted out. Through the window, Sarah could see them in the hallway, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument. That poor girl, Jennifer said, watching Elena cry while David gestured angrily. She has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Neither did I, Sarah said, but at least now we both know the truth. As Sarah settled back into her hospital bed, she realized something had changed. The initial shock and devastation of David's betrayal were being replaced by something else. Determination, clarity, strength she didn't know she possessed. She was no longer just a victim of David's lies. She was a woman with information, resources, and a growing network of allies. Even Elena, under different circumstances, might be someone she could work with rather than against. David Mitchell had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that the women in his life would never compare notes, would never discover the extent of his deception, would never unite against him. But Sarah was about to prove him very, very wrong. 2 weeks later, Sarah was back home and feeling stronger than she had in months. The bed rest ordered by Dr. Martinez had given her time to think, plan, and strategize with Marcus Thompson about the best way to proceed with the divorce. The asset freezing orders had gone through exactly as Marcus had predicted. David's ability to move money had been severely restricted, and he'd been forced to account for every major financial transaction over the past year. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands were under investigation, and several of the property purchases in Elena's name had been flagged as potential marital asset transfers. You did good work, Sarah, Marcus said during their meeting in his office. David's financial misconduct is so extensive that the court is treating this as a case of economic fraud rather than just a typical high-asset divorce. Sarah felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she felt like she had some control over her situation. What does that mean for the settlement? It means you're not just entitled to half of the marital assets. Given his attempts to hide community property and commit fraud, the court may award you significantly more. We're talking about a settlement that could leave you financially independent for life, with a substantial trust fund for your daughter. The meeting was interrupted by Marcus's assistant, who handed him a note. Marcus read it quickly, his expression shifting from professional satisfaction to surprise. "Well, this is interesting," Marcus said. "Your husband's attorney just called. David wants to settle out of court immediately. He's prepared to return all the hidden assets and pay you an additional $10 million in damages if you'll agree to an expedited, uncontested divorce." Sarah's heart leaped. $10 million on top of the $40 million he'd tried to hide, plus their house, plus his legitimate business assets. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. "He must be scared," she said. "The FBI investigation into his business practices must be more serious than we thought." "That would be my guess," Marcus agreed. "Men like David Mitchell don't offer settlements this generous unless they're trying to avoid something much worse." Sarah felt a rush of triumph. She'd gone from being a victimized wife to holding all the cards in less than a month. David had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. "How quickly can we make this happen?" she asked. "If you're willing to waive the waiting period, we could have you divorced and financially secured within 2 weeks." Sarah imagined the freedom of being completely done with David, of never having to see him again except for custody arrangements. The idea was intoxicating. "Let's do it," she said. That evening, Sarah was at home packing up David's remaining belongings when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find David standing in the hallway, looking more humble and defeated than she'd ever seen him. "Sarah," he said softly, "can we talk, please?" Against her better judgment, Sarah let him in. He sat on the edge of the living room sofa, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," he began, "but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Everything I did, all the mistakes I made, they weren't because I didn't love you and our daughter." Sarah sat across from him, studying his face. The charm and confidence that had first attracted her to him were gone, replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Then why? David, why risk everything for Elena?" David ran his hands through his hair. "I was scared, terrified actually. When you got pregnant, when we started talking about our future, about the family we were building, I panicked. I felt trapped by the weight of being responsible for you and the baby. So you decided to have an affair. I decided to prove to myself that I was still free, that I still had choices. Elena was exciting, new, uncomplicated. She didn't need anything from me except professional partnership and occasional companionship." Occasional companionship that resulted in pregnancy? David's face crumpled. "That was never supposed to happen. Elena was supposed to be temporary, a way for me to work through my fears before I came back to you, fully committed to our marriage." Sarah stared at him. "You were using Elena to prepare yourself to be a better husband to me. I know how it sounds. I know how selfish and cruel it was. But Sarah, I never intended to leave you. I never intended to hurt you. I just needed time to figure out how to be the man you deserved." For a moment, Sarah almost believed him. The pain in his voice seemed genuine, and his explanation, while twisted, had a certain psychological logic to it. Men did sometimes panic about impending fatherhood. They did sometimes make terrible decisions when feeling trapped by responsibility. "What about the money, David? How does stealing $40 million fit into your therapy plan?" "I wasn't stealing it," David said earnestly. "I was protecting it. I knew that if you ever found out about Elena, you'd divorce me and take half of everything. I thought if I could keep the money safe until I was ready to end things with Elena, I could bring it back and you'd never have to know about any of it. So you were protecting our assets by hiding them from me. I was protecting our daughter's future by making sure my mistakes couldn't destroy it." Sarah wanted to be angry, wanted to maintain the righteous fury that had sustained her through the past month. But David's explanation was making a horrible kind of sense. If he really had been planning to come back to their marriage, if Elena really had been just a temporary escape from his fears about fatherhood, then maybe his actions weren't as malicious as they seemed. "What about Elena now?" Sarah asked. "What about her baby?" David's face hardened slightly. "Elena was never part of the long-term plan. She got attached, started talking about a future together, and I realized I needed to end things before they got more complicated. She's pregnant with your child, David. That situation is being handled," he said, echoing the cold phrase he'd used during their confrontation. "Elena understands now that what we had was temporary." Sarah felt a chill at his casual dismissal of Elena and their unborn child. Even if Elena had been complicit in the affair, she didn't deserve to be discarded like a business deal that was no longer profitable. "I want to make this right, Sarah," David continued. "I want to be the husband and father I should have been from the beginning. The settlement I'm offering, it's not just about avoiding legal consequences. It's about proving to you that I'm willing to sacrifice everything to earn your forgiveness." Sarah looked at the man she'd married, the father of her unborn daughter, and felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to believe that people could change, that marriages could survive even devastating betrayals. "The affair is completely over. Completely. Elena knows it's finished, and you'll be faithful to our marriage from now on. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you can trust me." Sarah put her hand on her belly, feeling their daughter move. Maybe families could survive this kind of crisis. Maybe she could give David one more chance for the sake of their child. "The divorce settlement." "Forget the settlement," David said urgently. "Keep the money. Keep the financial security. I don't want you to feel like you need to stay married to me for economic reasons. I want you to choose our marriage because you believe we can build something better together." That night, Sarah lay in bed feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. David had moved back into the guest room temporarily, giving her space while they worked on rebuilding their relationship. He'd been attentive, loving, and seemingly dedicated to earning her forgiveness. Maybe she'd been too quick to assume the worst. Maybe the private investigator had only shown her part of the story. Maybe David really did love her and had just made some terrible mistakes while struggling with his fears about becoming a father. Sarah was almost asleep when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check David's car, glove compartment, tonight." Sarah stared at the message, her heart beginning to race. She considered ignoring it, convinced it was probably someone trying to cause trouble now that word of their marital problems had started to circulate in their social circles. But something about the message felt urgent, important. After an hour of lying awake debating, Sarah decided she needed to know for sure. She crept downstairs and used her spare key to access David's car in their building's parking garage. The glove compartment was locked, but she knew David kept the key in the same place he always had. Inside, she found Elena's latest pregnancy test and a note in David's handwriting that made her blood run cold. "I know this is difficult, but the procedure is scheduled for Thursday. After that, we can finally be together without complications. I love you, D." The note was dated yesterday. Sarah's hands shook as she realized the truth. David hadn't ended things with Elena. He was still planning a future with her. He was just making sure that future didn't include the complication of her pregnancy. He was forcing Elena to have an abortion while convincing Sarah that he wanted to save their marriage. David Mitchell was playing them both, manipulating them both, and he was doing it with a level of calculation that was truly terrifying. Sarah drove home in a daze, the note clutched in her trembling hands. When she walked into their penthouse, she found David waiting for her in the living room. "Where did you go?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of concern that now sounded completely fake to her ears. Sarah held up the note and watched his face go white. "You're still seeing her. You're making her have an abortion while telling me you want to save our marriage." David opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah cut him off. Don't lie to me anymore. I can't take any more lies." "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly calm. "You're trying to keep both of us on the hook while you figure out which option serves you better. But David, you just made a crucial mistake." "What mistake?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him that she'd already photographed the note and sent copies to Marcus Thompson and Patricia Walsh. You gave me evidence of ongoing fraud. That settlement offer you made, it's off the table now, and Elena is about to learn exactly what kind of man she's been dealing with. David's face transformed from concern to fury in seconds. You have no idea what you've just done. Sarah, no idea how much trouble you've caused for everyone involved. Good, Sarah said. It's time everyone knew the truth about David Mitchell. But as she watched her husband's face contort with rage, Sarah realized she'd made her own crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how dangerous a cornered man could be. The next morning, Sarah woke up to her phone buzzing incessantly. Text messages, missed calls, and social media notifications were flooding in faster than she could read them. Her first instinct was confusion, until she saw the first message from her friend Claire. Sarah, honey, I don't know what's going on, but you need to see what's online about you. Call me immediately. With growing dread, Sarah opened Instagram and saw that she'd been tagged in dozens of posts. The first one made her stomach drop to the floor. It was a professionally shot photo of her and David at a charity gala 6 months ago, but it had been manipulated. Sarah's face looked haggard and angry, while David appeared to be recoiling from her with an expression of fear. The caption read, "When keeping up appearances becomes abuse." David Mitchell finally speaks out about his wife's violent behavior during her pregnancy. Domestic abuse. Pregnancy hormones. Shocking hidden truth. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through more posts. Someone had created an entire campaign depicting her as an unstable, abusive wife who had been physically and emotionally tormenting her successful husband. Photos from their social life had been taken out of context and edited to support this narrative. One showed Sarah reaching toward David during what she remembered as a loving moment at a restaurant. The caption suggested she was grabbing him aggressively. Another showed David looking tired after a long day at work, with text claiming Sarah had been keeping him awake with violent outbursts. But the worst was a video that appeared to be security footage from their building's parking garage. It showed Sarah going to David's car the night before, opening the glove compartment, and taking something out. The caption read, "Proof Sarah Mitchell caught vandalizing her husband's property and planting evidence to support her false accusations." Sarah realized with horror that David had somehow accessed their building's security system and edited the footage to make her look like she was planting evidence rather than discovering it. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? My coworkers are showing me posts that make you look like some kind of psychotic pregnant woman who's been abusing David." "It's all lies, Jen. David is trying to destroy my credibility before I can expose what he's really done." "Well, it's working. This stuff is going viral. Someone set up multiple fake accounts to share and promote the posts, and people are believing it." Sarah checked Twitter and Facebook, finding similar content spreading across all platforms. The hashtag #PregnancyAbuse was trending, with hundreds of people sharing stories about pregnant women who had become violent or unstable. David's situation was being presented as an example of how men could be victims of domestic abuse too. More devastating were the comments from people in their social circle. Friends who had known Sarah for years were expressing shock and disappointment, saying they'd always suspected something was wrong with her behavior at social events. "She did seem really controlling at the Morrisons' dinner party last month." One comment read, "I felt bad for David having to deal with her mood swings. I heard she hired a private investigator to stalk him. That's not normal behavior for a pregnant woman." Poor David. He's been trying to protect her reputation, but obviously he had to speak out when she started getting violent. Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Thompson. "Sarah, we have a problem. David's legal team is claiming that you've been conducting a harassment campaign against him and Elena Rodriguez. They have screenshots of the social media posts about the affair, and they're saying you've been cyberstalking them." "Marcus, that's insane. I hired a private investigator legally, and everything I discovered was evidence of David's financial fraud and adultery." "I know that, and you know that, but public opinion is shifting rapidly. David's people are very good at manipulating narratives, and they've painted you as an unstable pregnant woman who's been abusing her husband and now trying to destroy his reputation with false accusations. Sarah sank onto her sofa, feeling overwhelmed. What does this mean for our case? It means we need to be very careful. If public opinion turns against you completely, it could influence potential jury pools if this goes to trial. More immediately, it means David is playing a much more sophisticated game than we realized. After hanging up with Marcus, Sarah tried to craft her own social media response, but everything she wrote sounded defensive and desperate. How do you prove a negative? How do you convince people that you're not abusive when someone has created an entire false narrative with manipulated evidence to support their claims? Her phone buzzed with another call. This time it was Elena Rodriguez. Sarah, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you. I got your number from the hospital records. Elena, what's going on? I need to talk to you, in person. There are things about David that you need to know, things that change everything. They agreed to meet at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from their usual Manhattan haunts. When Sarah arrived, she found Elena sitting in a corner booth, looking as devastated as Sarah felt. I'm so sorry, Elena said as soon as Sarah sat down. I had no idea he was going to do this to you. You mean the social media campaign? Did you know about it? Not until this morning when I saw the posts. Sarah, I need you to know that I never said any of those things about you being abusive or unstable. I never gave David permission to use my name or my story to attack you. Sarah studied Elena's face. The younger woman looked genuinely distressed, and her remorse seemed authentic. Elena, I found the note in David's car. The one about the abortion appointment. Elena's eyes filled with tears. He told me you'd given him permission to be with me. He said you were both planning to divorce after the baby was born, and that you'd actually be relieved if I had the abortion because it would eliminate a complication for your daughter's inheritance. The cruelty of David's manipulation was breathtaking. Elena, I never said any of those things. I didn't even know you existed until 2 weeks ago. I know that now. I've been such a fool. Elena pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a series of text messages. Look at what David sent me yesterday. Sarah read the messages with growing horror. David had told Elena that Sarah had become violently jealous and was threatening to hurt Elena and her unborn child if she didn't disappear. He'd claimed that the social media posts were Sarah's idea, a way to discredit him so she could get a better divorce settlement. He told me that if I didn't go through with the abortion and disappear quietly, you would destroy both of our reputations and possibly hurt me physically. Elena, I would never hurt you or threaten you. I'm 7 months pregnant myself. I'm not exactly in a position to be threatening anyone. I know that now, but David is very convincing. He has a way of making you believe things that aren't true, of making you doubt your own judgment. Sarah nodded, recognizing the pattern of manipulation she'd experienced herself. There's more, Elena continued. David didn't just steal money from your marriage. He stole money from our business partnership too. The Singapore expansion he kept talking about, it was real, but he diverted the funds to pay for his personal expenses. My investors are now threatening to sue me because the money they gave me to invest with David has disappeared. How much money? $12 million. Money that belonged to people who trusted me to invest it wisely. Elena started crying again. I could lose everything. Sarah, my reputation, my business, potentially even face criminal charges if it looks like I was complicit in the fraud. Sarah felt a strange kinship with Elena. They were both victims of David's manipulation, both women who had trusted him and been betrayed in different ways. Elena, I think we need to work together. What do you mean? I mean, David has been playing us against each other while he steals from both of us. Maybe it's time we compared notes and figured out exactly how extensive his lies have been. Elena nodded eagerly. I have financial records, emails, text messages. I kept everything because David always told me to document our business dealings carefully. And I have evidence of the affair, the hidden assets, and his attempts to manipulate both of us. They spent the next 2 hours going through their respective evidence. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been systematically defrauding multiple people while maintaining elaborate lies to keep them from discovering the truth. David hadn't just been having an affair with Elena. He'd been using their relationship to gain access to her investor network, then stealing money from those investors. He'd been using Sarah's trust and love to gain access to their marital assets, then hiding those assets to fund his schemes. Most shocking of all, they discovered that David had been planning to disappear entirely. Elena found emails to a lawyer in the Cayman Islands discussing the purchase of property under an assumed name and the establishment of a new identity. He was going to take all the money and disappear, Sarah said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. He was going to leave both of us with nothing and start over somewhere else. But first he needed to discredit us so that if we tried to expose him, no one would believe us, Elena added. The social media campaign, the lies about your being abusive, the story about me being an unstable mistress who was trying to break up a happy marriage, it was all designed to make us look unreliable if we ever tried to tell the truth. Sarah's phone buzzed with another notification. The social media attacks were intensifying. Someone had posted what appeared to be medical records suggesting that Sarah had been treated for psychiatric issues during her pregnancy. The records were fake, but they looked official enough to fool casual observers. We have to fight back, Sarah said. Together. How everyone believes his version of the story now. Sarah thought about everything Marcus Thompson had taught her about building legal cases. We do what David didn't expect us to do. We work together instead of against each other. We pool our evidence. We coordinate our response, and we make sure the truth comes out. But the social media campaign has already damaged both of our reputations. Maybe, but David made one crucial mistake. What's that? He assumed we'd never talk to each other. He assumed we'd be too jealous, too angry, too proud to compare notes. But now we have twice as much evidence as he thought we had, and we know the full extent of his lies. Elena looked hopeful for the first time since Sarah had arrived. What do we do first? We call my attorney and my private investigator. We put together everything we have. And then we destroy David Mitchell the same way he tried to destroy us. But as they gathered their evidence and prepared for war, neither woman realized that David had one more devastating card to play, and this time, he was prepared to use it. The devastating blow came 3 days later. Just as Sarah and Elena were beginning to build their case against David, Sarah woke up to find her bank accounts completely frozen. Not just the joint accounts she'd expected, but her personal accounts, her business accounts, even the small savings account she'd maintained since college. When she called the bank, the customer service representative explained apologetically that a court order had been issued freezing all of Sarah Mitchell's assets pending an investigation into potential money laundering and fraud. There must be some mistake, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I'm the victim of fraud, not the perpetrator. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but the order is very specific. All accounts associated with your name and social security number have been frozen until further notice. Sarah immediately called Marcus Thompson, who was as shocked as she was. This is highly unusual, Marcus said. David's attorneys must have convinced a judge that you pose a flight risk or that you've been involved in the financial crimes yourself. How is that possible? All of our evidence shows that David was the one stealing money. David's legal team is claiming that you and Elena Rodriguez have been working together to frame him. They're saying that the evidence you've gathered was fabricated as part of an elaborate extortion scheme? Sarah felt like the world was spinning around her. Marcus, that's insane. Elena and I didn't even speak to each other until 3 days ago. I know that, but David's attorneys have presented what appears to be a compelling timeline, suggesting that you and Elena have been collaborating for months to steal money from David's companies and then frame him for adultery when he discovered your scheme. What kind of timeline? Marcus's voice was grim. They have fabricated emails between you and Elena dating back 6 months. They have fake financial records showing payments from you to the private investigator you hired. But the payments supposedly started long before you claimed to have discovered the affair. They've created an entire alternate narrative in which you're the mastermind and Elena is your accomplice. Sarah sank into a chair, feeling overwhelmed. How is that possible? How can they create fake evidence that convincing David has access to sophisticated technology and unlimited resources? Creating convincing fake digital evidence isn't as difficult as people think, especially when you have the money to hire experts. The full implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Without access to her accounts, she couldn't pay Marcus's fees, couldn't pay for Patricia Walsh's continued investigation, couldn't even pay for basic living expenses. Marcus, what am I supposed to do? I'm 8 months pregnant. I have no access to money, and David has apparently convinced the court that I'm a criminal. I'm going to file an emergency motion to unfreeze your accounts, but that could take weeks. In the meantime, do you have family who can help you financially? Sarah thought about Jennifer, who was a nurse living paycheck to paycheck. She thought about her parents, who had retired on a modest fixed income. None of them had the resources to support her through an extended legal battle against a billionaire. The next devastating blow came later that afternoon. Sarah's obstetrician called to inform her that her insurance had been canceled. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but your husband's company has notified us that you're no longer covered under their health plan, given that you're due to deliver in 4 weeks. You'll need to make alternative arrangements immediately. That's impossible. I'm still married to David. I should still be covered. According to the insurance company, your husband has filed papers claiming that you've been living separately and are no longer his dependent. The insurance was canceled as of yesterday. Sarah hung up the phone and immediately tried to call David, but his number had been disconnected. She tried calling his office, but his assistant informed her that Mr. Mitchell was traveling internationally and couldn't be reached. Sarah realized that David had effectively disappeared while simultaneously destroying her ability to fight back or even survive financially. That evening, Jennifer arrived at the penthouse with a grim expression. Sarah, I hate to be the bearer of more bad news, but you need to see this. Jennifer handed her a legal document that had been delivered to the hospital where Jennifer worked. It's an eviction notice, Jennifer explained. David's attorneys are claiming that the penthouse is solely his property and that you've been living there illegally since the separation. Sarah read the document with growing horror. According to David's lawyers, Sarah had moved out of their home 2 months ago during a violent argument and had been breaking in regularly to steal property and harass David. They're claiming I don't live here. They're claiming you abandoned the marital home and have been trespassing. Sarah, they want you out in 48 hours. Sarah looked around the penthouse that had been her home for 5 years. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every photograph had been chosen by her. She'd created this space as a sanctuary for their family, a place where their daughter would take her first steps and speak her first words. Now she was being told she had 48 hours to leave and nowhere to go. You can stay with me, Jennifer said immediately. My apartment is small, but we'll make it work. Sarah was grateful for her sister's generosity, but the reality of her situation was overwhelming. In the space of 1 week, she'd gone from being a wealthy woman preparing to divorce her cheating husband to being a pregnant woman with no money, no home, no insurance, and no legal recourse. That night, Sarah packed a single suitcase with essentials for herself and the baby. As she folded the tiny clothes she'd bought for her daughter's nursery, tears streamed down her face. The beautiful crib David had insisted on ordering from Italy would stay behind, along with the mobile she'd chosen, the rocking chair where she'd planned to nurse her baby, and all the dreams she'd had for their daughter's future. Jennifer's apartment in Queens was a studio with barely enough room for 1 person, let alone 2 adults and a newborn. But Jennifer had cleared out half of her closet and set up an air mattress in the living area. It's not much, Jennifer said apologetically, but it's yours for as long as you need it. Sarah lay on the air mattress that night, staring at the ceiling and feeling her daughter move restlessly inside her. She thought about how much her life had changed in just 1 month. She'd gone from planning a nursery in a Manhattan penthouse to sleeping on an air mattress in Queens, wondering how she was going to pay for the hospital delivery of her child. The next morning brought another crisis. Sarah woke up with severe abdominal pain and bleeding. Jennifer rushed her to the nearest hospital, where they discovered that stress had triggered early labor at 36 weeks. "We need to admit you immediately," Dr. Martinez said after examining Sarah. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and the baby is showing signs of distress." "I can't afford to be admitted," Sarah said through her pain. "My insurance was canceled, and I don't have access to any money." Dr. Martinez looked confused. "Sarah, what are you talking about? You're one of our premium patients. Your husband's company has platinum-level coverage. My husband has apparently told his insurance company that we're separated and I'm no longer his dependent." Dr. Martinez's expression hardened. "Sarah, I don't care what your husband has told his insurance company. You're 36 weeks pregnant with a high-risk condition, and I'm not letting you leave this hospital until you deliver safely. But the bills, we'll figure out the bills later. Right now, my job is to keep you and your baby alive." Sarah was admitted to the hospital for the second time in a month, but this time she was alone. David was unreachable. Her assets were frozen, and she was about to become a mother with no idea how she was going to support her child. As she lay in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and receiving medication to stop her premature labor, Sarah felt more powerless than she ever had in her life. David had systematically destroyed every aspect of her security: financial, legal, social, and medical. But as she felt her daughter's heartbeat strong and steady on the monitor, Sarah made a decision. She might have lost everything else, but she hadn't lost her intelligence, her determination, or her love for her child. David Mitchell had made one crucial mistake in his systematic destruction of her life. He'd assumed that taking away her money and her home would leave her powerless, but he'd forgotten that the most dangerous person in the world is a mother protecting her child, and Sarah was about to remind him of that fact. Sarah was lying in her hospital bed, trying to figure out how she was going to rebuild her life from nothing, when Elena Rodriguez appeared in her doorway, carrying flowers and looking nervous. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," Elena said hesitantly. "I heard about what David did with your accounts and the eviction. I wanted to check on you." Sarah gestured for Elena to sit down. Despite everything that had happened between them, Elena was the only person who truly understood what David was capable of. "How did you find out about the accounts?" "Because he did the same thing to me," Elena said bitterly. "Yesterday morning, I woke up to find that all of my business accounts had been frozen. David's attorneys are claiming that I embezzled money from our partnership and that the evidence you and I gathered against him was fabricated to cover up my crimes." Sarah stared at Elena in shock. "He's destroying both of us simultaneously." "It gets worse. Remember the investors whose money David stole? They're now suing me personally for the full $12 million. David has convinced them that I was the one who took their money and that he was trying to stop me when he discovered the theft." Elena pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a series of news articles that had appeared online that morning. The headlines were devastating. "Tech entrepreneur Elena Rodriguez under investigation for investment fraud," and "Pregnant mistress accused of elaborate theft scheme." "Sarah, I'm facing criminal charges. The FBI raided my apartment this morning and seized all of my computers and financial records. My attorney says I could be looking at 20 years in prison if they can make the charges stick." Sarah felt sick. David hadn't just been playing them against each other. He'd been setting them up to take the fall for his crimes. "Elena, we have to fight this together. We're the only ones who know the truth about what David has been doing. How I can't afford an attorney anymore. My accounts are frozen just like yours, and no lawyer wants to take on a case against David Mitchell without substantial payment up front." Sarah thought about their situation. Two pregnant women, both financially ruined, both facing criminal charges, both abandoned by the man who had manipulated them. On the surface, they looked powerless, but appearances could be deceiving. "Elena, what if we've been thinking about this all wrong?" "What do you mean? What if the fact that we're both in the same situation isn't a weakness, but a strength?" Elena looked confused. "I don't understand." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Elena the social media attacks that were still circulating. "Look at what David's doing. He's trying to convince everyone that we're both unstable, unreliable women who can't be trusted. He's counting on the fact that people will believe his version of events because he's a successful businessman and we're just his pregnant victims. Right. So how does that help us? Because David has made one crucial error in his calculations. He's assumed that two women can't be more credible than one man. But what if we can prove that his story is impossible? Sarah opened her laptop and began pulling up the fabricated evidence that David's attorneys had submitted to the court. Look at this timeline they've created. According to David's lawyers, you and I have been working together for 6 months to steal money and frame him for adultery. Elena studied the documents. Yes, that's what they're claiming. But Elena, 6 months ago, I didn't even know you existed. 6 months ago, you thought you were David's business partner, not his mistress. 6 months ago, neither of us had any reason to conspire against David because we both thought he was trustworthy. Elena's eyes began to light up. You're saying we can disprove their timeline by showing that we had no motive to work together until we discovered the truth about David? Exactly. And more than that, we can show that David's story requires us to be simultaneously brilliant enough to orchestrate an elaborate financial fraud and stupid enough to leave obvious evidence of our supposed crimes. Sarah began pulling up more documents. According to David's version of events, we've been embezzling money for months but somehow forgot to cover our tracks. We've been planning to frame him for adultery, but somehow allowed him to discover our plan. We've been working together, but somehow left digital evidence of our conspiracy that any competent investigator could find. It doesn't make sense, Elena said, understanding dawning on her face. It doesn't make sense because it isn't true. David created a story that's internally inconsistent because he was more focused on making us look bad individually than on creating a coherent narrative. Elena sat back in her chair, thinking, but even if we can poke holes in his story, how do we prove what really happened? He has unlimited resources to create fake evidence, and we have nothing. We have something David doesn't have, Sarah said. What's that? We have the truth, and we have each other. Sarah began explaining her idea. Over the next hour, they developed a plan that was risky but potentially devastating to David's carefully constructed lies. The key is that David has been keeping us separated, Sarah explained. He's been manipulating us individually, telling each of us different lies, making each of us think we were the only one being victimized. But now that we're comparing notes, we can see the full extent of his deception. Elena nodded eagerly. And if we can document all of his lies, we can show that his current story about us conspiring together is just another lie. More than that, we can show that David's behavior follows a pattern. He finds vulnerable women, gains their trust, manipulates them into compromising situations, and then discards them when they're no longer useful. You think there are others. I think David Mitchell has been doing this for years. And I think if we can find his other victims, we can build a case that no amount of money or fake evidence can overcome. Elena was quiet for a moment, then looked up with determination. Sarah, I know someone who might be able to help us, my friend Marcus Chen. He's a forensic accountant who specializes in white-collar crime. He owes me a favor, and he has connections in the FBI's financial crimes unit. Sarah felt hope stirring for the first time in weeks. Do you think he'd be willing to look at our evidence? I think he'd be very interested in a case involving this much money and this level of sophisticated fraud, especially if we can show that David has been victimizing multiple women over several years. That afternoon, Marcus Chen arrived at the hospital with a laptop and several boxes of files. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 35, with the intense focus of someone who loves solving complex puzzles. Elena has filled me in on the basics, Marcus said, setting up his computer on the small table beside Sarah's bed. What you're describing sounds like a classic affinity fraud scheme, but on a much larger scale than usual. Affinity fraud, Sarah asked. It's when someone uses romantic or personal relationships to gain access to victims' money and trust. The perpetrator typically maintains multiple relationships simultaneously, tells each victim what they want to hear, and gradually gains control over their financial resources. Marcus began pulling up documents on his computer. The interesting thing about your case is that David appears to have been running multiple fraud schemes simultaneously. He was stealing from his marriage to Sarah, stealing from his business partnership with Elena, and stealing from Elena's investors. Is that unusual? Very right, most affinity fraudsters focus on one type of victim or one type of scheme. David's willingness to victimize multiple categories of people suggests either extreme greed or extreme desperation. Marcus spent the next 2 hours analyzing the financial documents that Sarah and Elena had gathered. His expression grew increasingly serious as he worked. Ladies, what you've uncovered here is much bigger than a simple case of adultery and hidden assets. David has been operating what amounts to a financial criminal enterprise. What do you mean? Elena asked. I mean, he's been using a network of shell companies, fake identities, and fraudulent documents to steal money from multiple sources and hide it offshore. The total amount we're talking about isn't $40 or $50 million. It's closer to $200 million. Sarah felt dizzy. $200 million. At least. And based on these patterns, I'd say David has been doing this for at least 5 years. Probably longer. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward them, showing a complex flowchart of financial transactions. Here's what I think has been happening. David identifies women who have access to money, either their own wealth or through their professional connections. He develops romantic relationships with them, gains their trust, and gradually gains access to their financial resources. Then he systematically drains those resources while maintaining the relationship as cover. But why keep so many relationships going simultaneously? Sarah asked. Because each relationship serves a different purpose. Sarah, your marriage gave him access to marital assets and social credibility. Elena, your business partnership gave him access to investor money and professional legitimacy. I suspect there are other women who served other purposes. Perhaps someone in banking, someone in real estate, someone in technology. Elena and Sarah looked at each other with growing understanding. We need to find the others, Elena said. Agreed. Marcus nodded. And I think I know how to do it. Marcus explained that financial criminals like David typically followed predictable patterns. They used the same methods, the same lies, and often even the same locations for their schemes. If we can identify David's patterns, we can probably find his other victims. And if we can find his other victims, we can build a case that shows David Mitchell isn't just an unfaithful husband or unethical business partner. He's a career criminal who has been systematically defrauding women for years. Sarah felt stronger than she had in weeks. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she wasn't just reacting to his attacks. She was building her own offensive strategy. Marcus, what do we need to do? We need to be very careful and very smart. David has unlimited resources and a team of expensive lawyers, but he also has a weakness. What's that? Arrogance. He's been so successful for so long that he's become careless. He's left digital footprints, financial trails, and most importantly, a pattern of behavior that any competent investigator can follow. Marcus began packing up his equipment. Give me 48 hours to run some preliminary searches. If I'm right about David's methods, I should be able to identify at least 2 or 3 other victims within the next few days. After Marcus left, Sarah and Elena sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything they'd learned. Sarah, Elena said finally, I owe you an apology. For what? For believing David's lies about you, for helping him hurt you, even if I didn't know that's what I was doing. Sarah looked at Elena, young, brilliant, vulnerable, and ultimately another victim of David's manipulation. Elena, we were both manipulated by someone who's apparently been perfecting his techniques for years. The fact that we figured out the truth and decided to work together says something about our strength, not our weakness. Elena smiled for the first time since Sarah had known her. David Mitchell has no idea what he's unleashed. Does he? No, Sarah said, feeling her daughter kick strongly inside her. He doesn't. But both women knew that their fight against David was just beginning, and they knew that before it was over, Things were going to get much worse before they got better. Marcus Chen's investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, he'd identified 3 other women who had been victimized by David Mitchell using the same methods he'd used on Sarah and Elena. The first was Rebecca Kim, a venture capitalist who had lost $8 million to David's fraudulent investment schemes 2 years earlier. The second was Amanda Torres, a real estate attorney who had unknowingly helped David purchase properties using stolen money. The third was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a successful surgeon who had been engaged to David 3 years ago and had never understood why he'd suddenly disappeared after gaining access to her investment accounts. "It's the same pattern every time," Marcus explained during their meeting in Sarah's hospital room. "David identifies successful women with access to money, develops romantic relationships with them, gains their trust and access to their finances, then disappears when he's extracted as much money as possible." Sarah studied the photographs of David's other victims. They were all intelligent, accomplished, financially independent women. The kind of women who should have been too smart to fall for a con artist's lies. "How did we all miss the warning signs?" Sarah asked. "Because David is very good at what he does," Marcus replied. "He studies his targets carefully, tells them exactly what they want to hear, and creates elaborate backstories to support his lies. Most importantly, he's patient. He doesn't rush the process. He builds genuine emotional connections before he starts stealing." Elena had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now she spoke up. "Marcus, what's our legal position now that we have evidence of a pattern? Much stronger. Individual cases of adultery or business fraud can be difficult to prosecute, especially when the perpetrator has unlimited resources for legal defense. But a pattern of systematic fraud against multiple victims changes everything." Marcus pulled out a thick folder. "I've been in contact with FBI agent Maria Santos, who specializes in financial crimes. She's very interested in David's case, especially because the total amount stolen appears to exceed $200 million. $200 million. Sarah was still shocked by the scope of David's crimes. "At least, and that's just what we've been able to identify so far. Agent Santos thinks there may be additional victims we haven't found yet." The next morning, Agent Santos arrived at the hospital with 2 other FBI agents and a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sarah had never been involved with federal law enforcement before, and she was nervous about the meeting. Agent Santos was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Sarah of Patricia Walsh, the private investigator who had started this whole investigation. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Santos began, "based on the evidence you and Miss Rodriguez have provided, we have enough to arrest David Mitchell on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." "Racketeering?" Elena asked. "RICO charges apply when someone operates an ongoing criminal enterprise. David's systematic fraud against multiple victims over several years qualifies." The prosecutor, a serious young man named James Park, explained the implications. "RICO charges carry much heavier penalties than simple fraud. If convicted, David could face 20 to 30 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal activity." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. "What about the money he stole? Can we get it back?" "That's where things get complicated," Agent Santos said. "David has been very sophisticated about hiding assets offshore. We'll be able to recover some of the money, but probably not all of it." "How much?" "Our preliminary estimate is that we can recover about 60% of the stolen funds. That would be enough to compensate you, Elena, and the other victims for most of your losses." Sarah did the math quickly. 60% of $200 million was $120 million. Even split among multiple victims, that would be enough to restore most of what David had stolen from her. "When will you arrest him?" Elena asked. Agent Santos smiled grimly. "That's the problem. David Mitchell left the country yesterday. Our sources indicate he's currently in the Cayman Islands, probably accessing hidden bank accounts." Sarah's heart sank. "So he's going to get away with it?" "Not necessarily. We have extradition treaties with most countries, and financial crimes of this magnitude get international attention. But it may take time to locate him and bring him back. The meeting continued for another hour, with the FBI agents explaining the process of building a federal case and the timeline for prosecution. By the time they left, Sarah felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, Sarah's optimism was rewarded with news that seemed too good to be true. Marcus Thompson called with an update from the civil court proceedings. Sarah, the judge has reviewed the evidence of David's systematic fraud and has issued an emergency order unfreezing your accounts. More importantly, he's granted you temporary control of all marital assets until the criminal case is resolved. What does that mean? It means you have access to money again. It means you can pay for your medical care, your legal fees, and your living expenses. And it means David's attempt to leave you powerless has backfired completely. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Marcus, I can't believe this is really happening. It gets better. The judge was so outraged by David's attempts to manipulate the legal system that he's also awarded you punitive damages. Even before the federal case is resolved, you're entitled to damages that should total at least $15 million. That evening, Sarah sat in her hospital bed surrounded by Elena, Jennifer, Marcus Chen, and Marcus Thompson. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a team of people working with her rather than against her. I have an announcement, Sarah said, looking around at the people who had become her allies. When this is all over, when David is in prison and we've recovered the stolen money, I want to start a foundation. What kind of foundation? Elena asked. A foundation that helps women who have been victimized by financial fraud and domestic manipulation. A foundation that provides legal assistance, financial support, and counseling to women who are trying to rebuild their lives after being betrayed by men they trusted. Jennifer smiled. That's a beautiful idea. Sarah. Elena, I'd like you to be my partner in running it. Your business experience and your understanding of what we've been through would be invaluable. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, I would be honored. As her friends and advisors left that evening, Sarah felt her daughter kicking strongly inside her. In less than 2 weeks, she would be giving birth to a child who would grow up knowing that her mother had faced impossible odds and won. But Sarah's sense of triumph was premature. Because, at that very moment, David Mitchell was sitting in a luxury hotel in Grand Cayman, planning one final move that would change everything. And this time, he wasn't just targeting Sarah's money or reputation. This time, he was targeting her daughter. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the elegant conference room of the Mitchell Foundation for Women's Financial Security, looking out at the audience of survivors, advocates, and journalists who had gathered for their first annual fundraising gala. She was wearing a navy blue dress that flattered her post-pregnancy figure, and her confidence radiated throughout the room. Her daughter Emma, now 10 months old, was being cared for by Jennifer in the foundation's child care facility upstairs. Emma was a beautiful, healthy baby who had inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's determination. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. A year ago, I was a woman who had lost everything. My husband had stolen our money, destroyed my reputation, and left me facing criminal charges for crimes I didn't commit. I was 8 months pregnant, living on my sister's air mattress, and wondering how I was going to pay for my daughter's birth. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Today, I stand before you as the director of a foundation that has already helped over 300 women rebuild their lives after financial abuse. We've recovered over $40 million in stolen assets, helped secure convictions against 23 financial predators, and provided emergency assistance to women who had nowhere else to turn. The applause was thunderous. Sarah looked out at the audience and saw Elena Rodriguez sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Elena had become not just Sarah's business partner, but one of her closest friends. She'd given birth to a son, Gabriel, 6 months after Emma was born, and the 2 children were being raised almost like siblings. But the most important thing this foundation has accomplished, Sarah continued, is proving that women who work together are more powerful than the men who try to victimize them individually. After the formal presentation, Sarah mingled with the guests, sharing stories about the foundation's work and accepting donations from wealthy philanthropists who had been inspired by her story. The foundation had grown far beyond what she'd originally envisioned, with offices in 5 cities and a staff of 42 people. At the end of the evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, a beautiful 3-bedroom space in a secure building on the Upper West Side. Emma was already asleep in her crib, and Sarah stood watching her daughter sleep, feeling grateful for everything they'd accomplished together. David Mitchell was serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. The FBI had eventually tracked him down in Switzerland, where he'd been arrested trying to access additional hidden accounts. The trial had been a media sensation, with prosecutors calling it one of the largest affinity fraud cases in American history. Sarah had testified against David, describing in detail how he'd manipulated her, stolen from her, and tried to destroy her when she discovered the truth. She'd felt no satisfaction in watching him be convicted, only relief that he could never hurt another woman the way he'd hurt her and Elena and all his other victims. The recovered assets had been more than enough to compensate all of David's victims and fund the foundation's operations for its first 5 years. Sarah had also received a substantial settlement from David's business insurance policies, ensuring her financial security for life. As Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on how dramatically her life had transformed. She'd gone from being a naive, dependent wife to becoming a successful advocate and entrepreneur. She'd built a team of brilliant women who shared her passion for helping other survivors. Most importantly, she'd created a legacy that would protect her daughter and countless other women from predators like David. Sarah looked at a framed photo on her nightstand, a picture of her and Elena at the foundation's groundbreaking ceremony, both of them holding their babies and smiling with genuine happiness. It was hard to believe that just 2 years ago, they had been enemies, manipulated into hating each other by a man who saw them only as tools for his own gain. Now Elena was not just her business partner, but one of her closest friends. Elena had proven to be brilliant at managing the foundation's financial operations, while Sarah excelled at the public speaking and advocacy work. Together, they had created something neither could have accomplished alone. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. They now operated in 12 cities, had helped over 800 women recover from financial abuse, and had secured convictions against 47 financial predators. The work was challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Sarah thought about some of their recent success stories. Maria Santos, a single mother whose ex-husband had stolen her life savings, was now a successful real estate agent who volunteered as a mentor for other survivors. Dr. Janet Kim had rebuilt her medical practice after her former partner embezzled from their clinic and now donated free services to foundation clients. Rebecca Williams had started her own accounting firm, specializing in helping women understand and protect their finances. Each success story reminded Sarah why the work mattered. David Mitchell had stolen money, but more than that, he had stolen women's confidence, their trust in their own judgment, and their faith in the future. The foundation didn't just recover assets, it helped women recover themselves. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Just put Gabriel to bed. He's been asking when he can have another play date with Emma. These kids are going to grow up thinking they're siblings." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Emma asks about Gabriel every day too. Maybe we should make it official and become godmothers to each other's children. I would love that. You know, sometimes I think David did us a favor by being such a complete monster. If he'd been just a regular cheating husband, we never would have become friends." Sarah laughed quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. It was true, the extreme nature of David's betrayal had forced her and Elena to work together in ways that had ultimately made them both stronger. Her phone buzzed again with another message from Elena. "By the way, I have some news. Marcus Chen asked me out on a real date. Not a business meeting disguised as dinner, but an actual romantic date." Sarah felt a surge of happiness for her friend. Marcus had been instrumental in building their case against David, and over the past year, it had become obvious that he and Elena had developed feelings for each other. That's wonderful. It's about time you two stopped pretending you were just colleagues. I'm nervous. It's been so long since I trusted my judgment about men. What if I'm making another mistake? Sarah understood Elena's fear completely. After being manipulated by David, both women had struggled with trusting their instincts about new relationships. Elena, Marcus spent months helping us for no payment when we had nothing to offer him. He worked 18-hour days to build the case against David because he believed in justice, not because he wanted something from you. That tells you everything you need to know about his character. You're right. I guess I'm just scared of being vulnerable again. Being scared is normal, but don't let David's ghost rob you of the chance to be happy. You deserve love. Elena. Real love from someone who sees your worth. After they finished texting, Sarah walked over to Emma's crib and watched her daughter sleep. Emma was 15 months old now, walking confidently and beginning to form simple sentences. She was curious, fearless, and startlingly intelligent. Everything Sarah hoped her daughter would be. Emma would grow up in a world where her mother was a successful businesswoman, where she was surrounded by strong female role models, and where she would learn from the earliest age that women could overcome any challenge when they worked together. Most importantly, Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had faced impossible odds and won. That knowledge would give her confidence to face her own challenges with courage and determination. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find her doorman holding a large bouquet of white roses. "These just arrived for you, Mrs. Mitchell." The delivery person said they were urgent. Sarah took the flowers with confusion. It was nearly midnight. Who would send flowers at this hour? She looked for a card and found a small envelope attached to the ribbon. Inside was a simple message in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Thank you for saving my life. You'll never know what your foundation meant to me. I hope someday I can pay it forward the way you did. A grateful survivor." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Messages like this arrived regularly at the foundation, but they never failed to move her. Somewhere in the city, a woman was sleeping peacefully tonight because the foundation had helped her escape from financial abuse and rebuild her life. That was David's true legacy, not the money he'd stolen or the lies he'd told, but the movement for justice and empowerment that had grown from his crimes. Sarah placed the flowers in a vase on her kitchen counter and took one last look around her apartment. It was beautiful, but not ostentatious, comfortable, but not extravagant. She had enough money to live however she wanted, but she'd chosen a life focused on purpose rather than luxury. Her bedroom walls were covered with photos from foundation events, newspaper clippings about their successful cases, and letters from women they'd helped. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage to David, a life of meaning, connection, and genuine accomplishment. As Sarah finally settled into bed, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The discovery of David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the beginning of her real life. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, that she could survive anything, and that she could build something beautiful from even the worst circumstances. David Mitchell was serving his 25-year sentence in federal prison, and Sarah rarely thought about him anymore. He'd become irrelevant to her life, a footnote in her story rather than the central character she'd once believed him to be. The women he'd victimized had gone on to accomplish amazing things. Sarah had started the foundation. Elena had become a successful advocate and was finding love again. Rebecca Kim had started her own venture capital firm focused on funding women-owned businesses. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had opened a free clinic for low-income women. Amanda Torres had become a leading expert on real estate fraud prevention. David had expected his victims to be destroyed by his betrayal. Instead, they had used their shared experience to build something powerful and lasting. Sarah closed her eyes and felt Emma kick gently in her sleep through the baby monitor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking help, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she belonged, in her own home, surrounded by evidence of her accomplishments. secure in the knowledge that she had turned her greatest trauma into her greatest triumph. She had been betrayed by a billionaire husband who thought he could destroy her with his lies and theft. Instead, she had destroyed him with the truth and built a legacy that would protect women for generations to come. Sarah Mitchell had won completely, and her victory was measured not in money or revenge, but in the hundreds of women who were sleeping safely tonight because she had chosen to fight back rather than give up. The story was finished, and it was beautiful.